On 15th August 1947, India gained independence from the British. At that time, there were 565 independent princely states. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and his deputy Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel used the carrot and stick method to unify India, rewarding states who chose to join with India and went to war with those who opposed the union. Most of the princely states peacefully merged with India, but a few did not. On 13 September 1948, the Indian army invaded and overran the princely state of Hyderabad, whose leader the Nizam chose not to unite with India. By the 1950s, the British and the French fully withdrew from India, but Portugal did not. The Portuguese controlled a small pocket of colonies, the largest being Goa, and smaller colonies called Dagara, Daman and Diu, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, collectively known as Estado da India. Goa, with its capital at Panaji, was the biggest colony and was central to Portuguese power. The Portuguese leader, Prime Minister Antonio Salazar, told India that Estado da India is not a colony but an extension of Portugal itself, so they have no plans to leave India. Even though the Portuguese army had just 4,000 troops, they boldly opposed India. Pandit Nehru was reluctant to attack Goa as Portugal was part of NATO and was not sure how US and UK would react if India was to invade Goa. In 1961, John F. Kennedy became the US president and he was sympathetic to India's cause. Nehru saw an opportunity and gave the green light to attack Goa. The Indian military launched Operation Vijay. The Portuguese army had 3,995 men, of which 810 were native Indians. The Portuguese navy had just one warship, the Afonso de Albuquerque, and 3 patrol boats, one each for Goa, Daman and Diu. Even though the Portuguese had airports, they did not have any warplanes, only a few transport aircrafts. The Indian Army brought in 45,000 troops of the 17th Infantry Division and the 50th Parachute Brigade Command. The Indian Navy deployed 16 ships, including 1 aircraft carrier, 1 destroyer, 8 frigates, and 4 minesweepers. The Indian Air Force deployed 42 aircrafts, which included 20 Canberra medium bombers. The Portuguese tried to bring in more battleships from Portugal, but was not given permission by Egypt to cross the Suez Canal by the Egyptian President Abdul Nasser, a close friend of Pandit Nehru. The Portuguese knew they were no match to the Indian army, but wanted to deter India politically by showing a strong determination to fight. The Commander-in-Chief of the Portuguese Armed Forces in India was M.A. Vasco e Silva. He received strict orders from Prime Minister Antonio Salazar to fight the Indian army to the last man and never surrender. Operation Vijay will have 3 dimensions. The army will attack Goa on multiple fronts from north, east and south. The Air Force will provide air cover and will also take out important targets. The Navy will take care of Portuguese battleships. The Indian Army will also engage Portuguese resistance in Anjidiv Islands, Daman and Diu. On 17 December 1961, at 9:45 am, the Indian Army fired the first artillery round on the northeastern town of Moliguin. Operation Vijay had begun. Soon the Indian troops attacked and captured the town, killing 2 Portuguese soldiers. At 4:30 pm, the Indian artillery bombardment began on the town of Bijolin. The next morning of 18 December, the 5th Para Brigade of the Indian Army moved into Goa in 3 columns. The eastern column, comprising of the 2nd Para Maratha, advanced towards the town of Ponda in central Goa via Usgaon. The central column, consisting of the 1st Para Punjab, advanced towards Panaji via the village of Banastari. The northern column, the main thrust of the attack, comprising the 2nd Sikh Light Infantry and the Armoured Division, crossed the border at 0630 hours and advanced on Tivi. On the morning of 18th December, the Indian Air Force contingent of 12 English electric Canberra fighter aircrafts, led by Wing Commander N.B. Menon, pounded the Daman airport with 63 pounds of explosives, severely damaging the runway. A few hours later, a second raid was conducted and this completely destroyed the runway. However, the air command structures and facilities at the airfields were left undamaged as per the original plan. A third Indian raid involving 6 Hunter aircrafts bombed the wireless station at Bambolim with rockets and gun cannons. On the morning of 18 December, the Portuguese warship Afonso de Albuquerque was anchored off Mormugao Harbour. At 1200 hours, 3 Indian frigates led by INS Bitwa received orders to attack Afonso and secure sea access to the port. The Indian Navy contingent fired from their 4.5-inch guns at Afonso and also sent a Morse signal to surrender. But Afonso turned back and started firing using its 120mm guns. Afonso, even though bigger and stronger, could fire only 2 rounds per minute, whereas the Indian frigates could fire 16 rounds per minute. At 12:15 hours, Afonso took a direct hit in its control tower, injuring its weapons officer. At 12:25 hours, an anti-personnel shrapnel bomb fired from an Indian vessel exploded directly over the ship, killing its radio officer and severely injuring its commander, Captain Antonio da Cunha, after which the first officer Pinto da Cruz took command of the vessel. The ship's propulsion system was badly damaged in this attack. By 12:50 hours, Afonso had fired nearly 400 rounds at the Indian ships, but was hit badly by the Indian Navy ships. The captain then gave the order to abandon ship. Afonso was then grounded into the Goa beach. The captain and his crew then ran away to avoid capture by the Indian Navy. By 17:45 hours on 18 December, the Portuguese troops were retreating to Panaji but were destroying all the bridges. The Indian troops of the 2nd Sikh Light Infantry began their march towards the capital Panaji. But their movement was slowed down due to mines laid down by the Portuguese army and the destruction of bridges. By 2100 hours, the Indian army arrived at Betim, just across the Mandavi River. Major Sivdev Singh Sidhu of the 7th Cavalry made an attempt to capture Fort Aguada, but was repulsed by the Portuguese army and was killed in action. The next day on 19 December, the 7th Cavalry got support from an armoured division stationed at Betim. They now re-attacked the fort. The heavy artillery fire was too much for the Portuguese and they quickly surrendered. Fort Aguada was captured. The Indian army then crossed the Mandavi River and they were just a few kilometers from Panaji. Meanwhile, in the east, the 63rd Indian Infantry Brigade, consisting of 2nd Bihar Battalion and the 3rd Sikh Battalion, linked up at the border town of Malem. The 3rd Sikh proceeded first and took Darbandara without any resistance, while 2nd Bihar pushed forward and took the town of Kandepar, again without any resistance. They will now proceed to Ponda, but their progress was hampered because all bridges spanning the rivers have been destroyed. In the west, the 4th Sikh Infantry proceeded to attack the harbour of Mormugao. While en route, they faced stiff resistance from 500-odd Portuguese troops in the village of Varna. The 4th Sikh Infantry was later joined by the 2nd Bihar Regiment. After a severe fighting, the Portuguese troops surrendered at 15:30 hours. The Sikh and the Bihar Regiment then proceeded to attack Mormugao Harbour and Dublin Airport, where the main body of the Portuguese army awaited the Indians. Meanwhile, the 4th Rajput Company attacked and captured the city of Margao. Anjidiv is a small 1.5 square kilometer island of Portuguese India and is almost uninhabited. On the island stood a 16th century Anjidiv fort. It was defended by a platoon of Portuguese soldiers. On 18 December, Indian naval ship INS Mysore and frigate INS Trishul started pounding the fort with heavy artillery guns. Under the cover of artillery fire, Indian Marines under the command of Lieutenant Arun Aditya stormed the island at 14:25 hours. But the Portuguese fired back heavily, killing 7 Indian Marines and injured 19. The Indian naval ship then increased the rate of fire and the Portuguese position began to fall off. Fighting continued the whole night and on the next day on 19 December at 1400 hours, the fort fell. Daman is a 72 square kilometer area controlled by the Portuguese at the south end of Gujarat bordering Maharashtra. The area was divided into Nani Daman and Moti Daman, with the Daman Ganga river separating both. Daman was guarded by 360 soldiers of the Portuguese army, 200 policemen and about 30 customs officials under the command of Major Antonio Jose da Costa. They had 87.5mm artillery and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. The strategically important features were the Daman fort and the air control tower of Daman Airport. The Indian advance was to be carried by the 1st Maratha Light Infantry Battalion. At 0400 hours on 18 December, the attack on Daman starts with the Indian Air Force mystery fighters striking Portuguese mortar positions and guns inside Moti Daman fort. At 0430 hours, the Indian artillery starts shelling all over Moti Daman. The artillery attack combined with continuous airstrikes makes Portuguese communications and reinforcement between Moti and Nani Daman difficult. Thereafterwards, the Indian Air Force bombers fly sorties bombing targets in Nani Daman. A fierce fighting begins. At 0730 hours, an Indian army unit which tried to take the Daman airstrip began to receive heavy shelling from a Portuguese unit at the fort of St. Jerome. The Indian Air Force now attacked the fort. There was intense fighting all throughout the day. By 1700 hours, in the absence of resistance, the Indian army managed to occupy most of the territory except the airfield and some part of Nani Daman, where the Portuguese were making their last stand. One patrol boat named NRP Antares avoided the Indian naval ship detection and traveled 850 kilometers to Karachi, avoiding capture by the Indian Navy. Diu is a small island at the southern tip of Gujarat. The Portuguese garrison in Diu had 400 soldiers headed by Major Fernando de Almeida. Diu had an airfield but had no military planes. Nevertheless, the capture of this airfield became a primary objective of the Indian Army. Diu was to be attacked on 18 December from the northwest along Kobe by two companies of the 20th Rajput Battalion and from the northeast along Gogla by Rajput B Company and 4th Madras Battalion. At 0130 hours, 18 December, 4th Madras attacked Gogla, but the Portuguese repulsed the attack with their 87.5mm artillery guns, rendering heavy losses to the Indian Army. The Indian Army made many more attempts but could not break the deadlock. At 0300 hours, two companies of the 20th Rajput, under the cover of darkness, attempted to cross the creek using rafts made of bamboo cords tied to oil barrels. The objective was to establish a bridgehead and head towards the airfield. They were spotted by the Portuguese army and soon came under heavy artillery and machine gun fire, which damaged their makeshift bamboo rafts. The Indian soldiers were not able to proceed and hence abandoned their rafts and headed back to Kobe. At 0700 hours, Indian airstrikes began. The Indian fighter jets pounded Gogla with multiple sorties and forced the Portuguese to retreat. This helped the Rajput B Company to take Gogla. By 10:15 hours, the Indian cruiser INS Delhi arrived at Diu. It fired its heavy artillery 6-inch guns at the Portuguese-occupied Diu fortress. The Portuguese patrol boat NRP Vega moved in to intercept INS Delhi. The patrol boat came under heavy fire from INS Delhi. NRP Vega avoided moving too close to INS Delhi as it was no match to the Indian ship. The patrol boat then retired to Diu port. At 12:45 hours, the Indian fighter jets fired a rocket at the ammunition dump at Diu fortress, causing a huge explosion followed by a fire. This forced the Portuguese to evacuate the fortress. Soon the Diu garrison surrendered to the Indian Army. The Indian Army took 403 prisoners, which included the governor of the island, along with 18 officers and 43 sergeants. 7 Portuguese soldiers had been killed in the battle. By the evening of 18 December, Governor-General Manuel Antonio took stock of the numerical superiority of the Indian troops, as well as the food and ammunition supplies available to his forces. The situation was grim, with continuous bombardment from both Indian naval ships and Indian Air Force jets. He had to take a decision now. The Governor-General felt that continued fighting will only lead to unnecessary loss of life without much result. So he took the bold decision to surrender, ignoring Prime Minister Antonio Salazar's warning of not to surrender. So the next day morning on 19 December, the Portuguese formally communicated their decision to surrender to the Indian Army. At 20:30 hours, 19 December 1961, Governor-General Manuel Antonio signed the instrument of surrender, bringing to an end 451 years of Portuguese rule in India. In all, 4,666 personnel were taken prisoners of war by the Indian Army. Upon the surrender of the Portuguese Governor-General, Goa and Daman and Diu were declared a federally administered union territory placed directly under the President of India, and Major General K.P. Kandat was appointed as its military governor. The war lasted for 2 days and had cost 22 Indian and 30 Portuguese lives. If you like this video, please subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.